In this edition of Sporting Greats, the man often described as the greatest driver never to have won the World Championship. He was the first Englishman to win the British Grand Prix, and although he's driven practically everything on four wheels, rally cars, saloons, sports cars, he failed to pass his scooter test in 1963. He's the legendary Stirling Moss. Stirling Moss, you're one of the easiest people, I think, to classify as a sporting great because of the way your name has passed into everyday use.
Well, I'm glad it has. I work quite hard at keeping it there, actually. But no, it's a great help to me.
Yeah. Has a policeman ever pulled you over and said, "Who do you think you are, Stirling Moss?"
Not quite like that, no. But I have had sort of remarks, yes.
Would you describe yourself as a natural, or was your skill learned over the years?
I think it's half and half. I think obviously I inherited a certain amount of feeling for the sport. I think that then one takes what one's got and sharpens it up, because there's no doubt that when I started racing, they always said to me, look, you never brake in a corner. You always brake before the corner, accelerate round it. Well, certainly after 4 or 5 years of driving, I reckoned that this was not correct, and therefore I do and did race into a corner, still with my brakes on, and use the brakes to position the car. So certainly I took what I had, and I think, and honed it up a bit.
What about your folks? What sort of influence were they on you?
Quite a big influence. My father tried to stop me from racing. Actually, my dad had raced. He was a dentist, and he'd raced at Brooklands and Indianapolis and so on. My mother did trials and hill climbs and was one of the ladies' experts in 1936, I think, when I was obviously quite a youngster. And I ordered my first car from money I'd won show jumping, and my father found the checkbook, 50 quid as a deposit on the car, which incidentally was never made. He said, "What's this?" And I had to own up. And he said, "Look, it's no way you're going to be a racing driver." And he took my, I then had a Morgan three-wheeler. He said, he took that away and said, "You can ride a bicycle." And this was a come down. You know, when you're 16 years old and you've got a Morgan, boy, you know, that's a fairly important thing when you're dating girls, you know. And so he did that, but then ultimately I massaged him and he allowed me to do some sprints in his BMW 328, and then I got a Cooper. And then he was a great help to me.
But there was a time that you contemplated a different career. I mean, I heard you were a trainee hotel manager.
Yes, I hadn't got, unfortunately I couldn't get the qualifications required to go to hospital to become a dentist, which was the obvious thing.
Yeah.
Dad had, I think, about 17 surgeries around London. And therefore I didn't know what to do. And by then I was thinking about getting into trying to do sport. And we spoke about things. He said, well, look, all right, if you go into the hotel business and you learn the trade, start at the bottom. I joined a company called Associated British Hotels, and I was a trainee manager. I worked telephones when you put them in, you put a cord in, you know, all that sort of thing. And I went through the office work and all that, and I became a commie chef at the Palmerston restaurant in the city. And this is, of course, I was only 17 years old, and went on. In those days, we worked Saturday mornings as well. And I had to get permission to take Saturday morning off so I could go to the hill climbs. And then my father said, well, look, if it's difficult for you, you can work on the farm. So I tried to become a farmer. And then, luckily, my racing took off a bit, and I was offered a professional drive by a chap called John Heath. And I was then 18, and starting my 19th year, and so I then started to race as a living.
Do you know why people say he became or she became a totally different person once they got behind the wheel of that car? Would that apply to you?
Yeah, but yes, it does, because no doubt when you're there, you have to concentrate entirely on what you're doing, and therefore you can't, the side things, you can't bother about the niceties. And you've got to, if you're competitive, you've got to have one idea, and that is to go out there and try and win, and you use everything you can to achieve that goal. I mean, it didn't stop you seeing a pretty girl. I must admit, you could be driving and you see a pretty girl, give a wave. I mean, it's something quite different. That's part of the business. But no, yes, you have to be very dedicated, no doubt.
Yeah. When we look back at the classic footage of that era of you were starting in the 50s, it all looks so romantic.
Yeah.
But,
it was.
But really, was there not a ruthless side to it?
Yeah. I suppose to an extent, but not really. I mean, there were a couple of dirty drivers, not honestly, really not many. And usually if a guy was bad, you go up and have a word with him and say, look, you better not do that to me. So it was cut and thrust, certainly. I mean, it was very competitive. I mean, the guys, you're really trying to beat the other man. It was dangerous. It was very dangerous. We used to, unfortunately, lose 2 or 3 drivers a year, which was was the downside. I mean, unfortunately, because the cars weren't that strong, because we raced on open roads, that sort of thing, I mean, the circuits were not as safe as they are today. That was the downside. But when there was an accident and somebody was hurt, you'd always think, well, you know, I wouldn't have actually been going quite as fast as that. I have a greater safety margin, if you like, or I have a bit more skill or whatever.
Tell me about safety in cars. I mean, it seems to be paramount in the business today.
No. Yeah, well, there's no doubt the cars today are extremely safe. They're fantastic. I mean, I think the trouble with safety is it's ruining the sport. Well, it isn't the sport, it's a business now. No, I mean, the way I mean it is the safer a car gets, the more contempt you get of danger. I mean, in my day, I can tell you this, no way would you think of trying to drive another guy off the road at a high speed because you know you're likely to go with him. Today, we've had, you see the very finest drivers in the world actually punting other people off at 100, 150 miles an hour, sometimes 170. And that I think, is an indictment of the sport.
So what was in that car to protect you in your day?
Not much, just you. I mean, we didn't wear seatbelts, of course, because the cars were very prone to catching fire, because behind you had usually a 40-gallon aluminium fuel tank, and then sometimes if it was a long-distance race, they put another one over your legs, sometimes on the side, and therefore fire was a continual hazard. The only safety thing you had was if you were able to keep it on the road. I mean, that's why they painted it black, you know.
I've seen pictures of you driving in short sleeves.
Yeah.
Helmets, were they compulsory or optional?
No, when I started, helmets weren't compulsory. And my father said to me, look, if you're going to race, you're going to wear a crash hat. And I said, oh, Dad, that's a bit sissy, you know. I mean, the really fast guys, you know, Fagioli and Sommer and so on, they used to wear these cloth helmets, you know, just cloth flying helmet. And he said, no, if you're going to drive, you're going to wear a crash hat. So I always did. And then I would wear, because it was pretty hot inside the car, because you've got an engine in the front and the oil pipes running along and so on and so forth. It got really, even in the rear engine car, it was still very hot inside, and so I quite often run with short sleeves, so you get a tan. And until it got, then I found that oil on certain cars like Maseratis, a lot of oil came back, so therefore you wear overalls because the oil was burning hot. But no, you could wear what you like. It's only safety clothing has come in actually after I retired.
And what caused all this dirt over your face?
Oh, that's because in that car, in the car where I get most dirt on my face was a Mercedes, and they had inboard brakes. And obviously, as the brakes wear, dust comes out, as you see on an ordinary car, and that dust, together with a sort of oil vapor, if you like, would then stick to your face. Other than the white panda eyes, where you had a pair of goggles, you see.
You strike me as a man who is very proud to be English, very proud to be British, very proud to fly the flag and be an ambassador for this country.
Gone now. There isn't the same. It just doesn't seem to happen nowadays. I mean, when I started racing, I mean, to be British was something that I was really proud of. I mean, I still am, but nowadays it doesn't seem to happen. I mean, people used to stand up for God Save the Queen and that sort of thing, and I still remember that.
It must have been very important for you, though, to be the first Englishman to win the British Grand Prix in a British car.
That was, I tried to race British cars all my life, and I unfortunately, after in 54, I had to go and drive a Maserati, and then I went to Mercedes, great cars, but there were no English cars at all. Then along came the Van Wall, that very pretty car, and that gave us the chance, as English people, to drive English cars. I like to be patriotic, and to drive an English car was fantastic. But winning's more important. I mean, winning a race to me was what I was there to try to do.
Coming up to the Melling Crossing, the first time in motor racing history that a British driver and a British car has ever won the Grand Prix d'Europe, the principal motor racing event in the world. Stirling Moss, you have achieved this afternoon, and I know this to be true, the ambition of a lifetime. How does it feel now you've done it at last?
Well, it feels terrific, Ray, actually, because I didn't really think that I'd do it, because I haven't been too fit, and neither's Tony. and to sort of leave it all to Stuart is asking a bit much, but it feels pretty terrific now.
What were your memories of the British Grand Prix and winning it?
To come through and win at Aintree in a British car, and a Vanwell of all, I mean, it's such a super looking car. It was a very emotive time, and when I look back on it, it sort of brings goose pimples up a bit, because it was so important. At that time, it was the most important thing ever.
All things being equal, though, could you take a modern race car and put it on a circuit like that?
No, you could not, no. Because a modern race car makes demands of a particularly good surface and so on. So, in other words, modern race cars are not built for road racing, they're built for track racing. When I say a track, I mean Silverstone is not a track, but they've made it that it is that good that they can race them on it. So it requires quite different things. You see, the circuits I'd race on, I mean, there would be milestones at the side of the road, and there'd be obviously, sometimes there'd be tram lines. And I mean, you just keep out of them. I mean, and the bus stops and curbs on the side and all that. You know, so it really is, it is completely changed. And to me, that was the character of it, to be able to get on a road and be paid to actually break the limit and put your foot down and go like hell. And that's something which doesn't happen now.
You see, I love watching Formula One on telly. I love the glamour and the spectacle and the noise and the colour and all that sort of thing. But I'm from a different era. I mean, I don't see it from your perspective. Yes. Is it an exciting event for you to watch, or is it very frustrating? Or
No, it's exciting. It's interesting to see when a driver will make his move and the technical things they do. Yes, I find that very interesting. I don't get the feeling that, gosh, I want to be there as much as I would with the sort of racing that I know.
Do you think you could hold your own on today's Formula One circuit?
I certainly couldn't today, but if I had the same expertise I had at the time I was racing, yes, I don't see why not. I mean, I was racing against people like Fangio, who was the Schumacher of the time, and I was beating them sometimes, and you know, I did actually get pole position with my own private Mazda in 1954 at Bern, which was quite a difficult circuit, and it was my own car. So yeah, I would hope so. Yes.
What about today's drivers holding their own in your world?
I'm sure that they could have done if they'd been at our time. In other words, with the knowledge and experience they have today of the cars they're driving, obviously it's quite different. In the same way, there's no way could I get anywhere near them today, and neither would Fangio, who in my mind was the greatest driver ever. But I think that it's rather like Roger Bannister. I mean, he's really slow by modern standards, but you know, at the time he did the 4-minute mile, that was unachievable by anybody, and I'm sure, therefore, if Roger were at the right age now, he'd still be doing the speeds he'd need to do, and I think you can say that. I think that if you could take the people, the best people today, people like Michael Schumacher, Mika Häkkinen, if you like, back to our era, I'm sure they'd have been very competitive then, yes.
Mm. Do you think today's drivers get the credit that they deserve or not? I mean, so often people say, yeah, well, it's the car that does the work. It's all down to the car.
Unfortunately, I think that today's car does contribute more towards the success of the team than it used to. I think that in my day and Fangio's day, I think Fangio could contribute probably 30 or 40% of the winningness of the team. I think if he were racing today, he would only be able to contribute maybe 5 or 10%, not because his ability has lessened or that the people today are less, but just that the cars are so much better and so much is sort of taken care of for you.
Do you think these guys today have more pressure on their shoulders than you did? And I mean, sometimes that shows in their behaviour. I mean, they're at each other literally by the neck in the pits.
Yeah, but I don't think. I think there's pressure, whatever you do. If you're trying to win, there's pressure, whichever way you look at it. I do think they get a lot of commercial pressure, understandably. I mean, I look at the money they're paid, but I know they don't get the fun. And I think if you're having the fun and you're chasing the girls and you're living the life that we did, then okay, maybe the pressure doesn't hurt you so much.
What about the life that you led? I mean, it strikes me talking to you that it seemed to be a big adventure.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I can tell you, I mean, I can remember when I was young, I'd go with the chap called John Heath, who I was racing for. I couldn't afford to take my own car at the start. And I'd drive with him in his car. We'd go from one race, and we're racing every week, remember, around Europe. And a race, shall we say you go to Aix-les-Bains. You'd arrive there on the Thursday, you practice on the Friday and the Saturday, And on Sunday the race would take place, and they'd take the ordinary roads and they'd cordon them off with straw bales, and everybody would sort of turn out, and then you'd have a party in the evenings, you know, I mean, after the race. We didn't drink in those days at all, but we had fun, and it was an incredible adventure. I mean, after the race, if you didn't go to party after the race, you didn't get your prime de départ, you didn't get the money. Really? So everybody went there, you know, I mean, that's the way it was.
And what about your cars? What decided actually what car you would drive that particular season, or what happened to a car at the end of the season?
At the beginning of the year, you would negotiate with the various people who might give you an offer. Shall we say, in my case, I didn't get many offers. It was John Heath, and that was it. So he was the only one racing then. And John came to me and said, would I drive for him? He'd give me 25% of our starting money. Now, starting money, you were paid depending upon your box office appeal, if you like. In other words, if you had a name and you were known as, shall we say, Farina was, they'd say, well, gosh, we want Farina, we'll pay this much. In my case, I was 19 years old. Now, that's a benefit. I mean, it's much better for the organizer to have a 19-year-old person than somebody, shall we say, a 39, purely because it's more likely to get a story. Then you come along at the end of a race. If I'm going around, I'd wave to the public, you know, and they wave back, and then hopefully the organizer would say, God, that guy's popular. We need him next year. So you get a bit more the following year. But it depended on your box office appeal, and you get paid probably £250 to go to Aix-les-Bains, shall we say, or 300. Then I get 25% of that on which I had to live, which of course in those days you could, but not high on the hog. But you didn't need to live high on the hog because the fun, the enjoyment of going around seeing Europe, and this is when, you know, I mean, there weren't very few people going abroad, very few, and it was just wonderful. I mean, we were the only English team. There was Lance Macklin, myself, and John Heath, of course, was the man who owned it, and we had a couple of mechanics, and the cars went in the back of a bus, and John Heath made the cars, but it was just, we then raced against the French and the Germans, you know, all these people come along. But it was a wonderful thing because every weekend there'd be a race somewhere, Pau, Sable d'Olonne, Bordeaux, San Remo, and the circus would move from one to another, different people, differing a little bit. Sometimes Bruce Holford would be there, sometimes he wouldn't, sometimes Maurice Trantignon would, you know, the various names of that time. And you just go from one to another. It was fantastic.
Did you bring the car home at the end of the season, or did it stay in
No, John Heath, those things, John Heath would usually keep the car or maybe sell them, but then later on we used to go to places like Australasia and race in Australia and New Zealand. And that is where we'd flog the cars, because, you know, this is the end of the year. The race is over there, obviously, at the end of the year, because the weather's better. And we'd do the races, and then the locals would come up and say, well, will you sell the car? Well, we knew new cars were coming along, as obviously they did, but they couldn't buy them. And so we'd sell them our cars. So although our cars had a pretty tough year, they were beautifully, you know, well prepared and well looked after. So they got a good car, and we got rid of an old car.
Do you ever wish you had have held on to a few of those cars?
Oh gosh, I mean, I can tell you. I mean, admittedly, I did own one car, a Mazda, which I paid $3,400 for. And a man rang me up 10 years ago. He said, would I like to buy it for $75,000? And I looked up. I said, well, I only paid $7,500 for this, but it was new. I didn't take it. Now that thing is worth $1.5 million. So I was the loser.
Partly because Stirling Moss drove it, of course.
Well, that did help in this case, yes, very much.
Looking at the old footage of you, and you're now approaching your 70th year, although you don't look it, you're a man who's changed relatively little over the years.
Yeah, well, I was lucky because I started to go bald when I was quite young. I mean, I started to recede here. And it didn't worry me because I was young and people, they called me Baldy. But when you're only 25 or 27, you don't care if they call you Baldy. I mean, it's a laugh. I had these ears sticking out anyway. And so gradually it went back, and then it went. And I must say, I'm very lucky because people say, gosh, you haven't changed. Well, mainly, if you keep your hair, it goes grey. And that is in itself, I think, aging. Whether the people look old or not depends obviously on their face a lot, but I think it is more aging than being bald normally. So it's been a great help. I mean, the thought of having hair now is appalling to me. When I read of people who you know, have these plugs put in, it's terrible. I mean, I really feel sorry for them.
Did vanity never tempt you, though, Stirling, to try a toupee, a wig?
No, look, the reason I was a racing driver, old boy, is I'm not that good looking. I couldn't do the films, so this is why I learned to drive a car. No, I did actually. They did actually. A company called Crown Topper came to me once and said, would I endorse their Crown Topper? And I said, well, only if you'll let me contribute to what you write. And so the advert ran. My baldness is my trademark, and therefore I can't afford to wear a hairpiece. But if I did, a Crown Topper's the one, and it was a wonderful hairpiece if you want hair.
Excellent. It all came to an end competitively. 1962.
Yeah,
Goodwood.
Easter Monday.
Yeah.
Easter Monday. And
What do you remember about that accident?
Nothing. I remember the night before, a party. Had a terrific party. I met a very, very cute girl there and so on, and chatting her up a bit. And then the race day, I don't remember anything at all because I was then unconscious for a month and paralysed for 6 months. And you know, when you come to after being unconscious, you don't realise you're unconscious. I mean, it's like waking up in the morning. And so the first thing I knew, really, it was a day later, but it wasn't. It was a month later. And of course, I did have this problem with paralysis on one side. And that really finished my racing career. It meant I had to work for a living. That's a shock to a 32-year-old, you know.
I held his hand, you know, and I squeezed it, and he squeezed it back. And then after a little while, I said, hello, darling, it's Mum. Can you hear me? And I think, I don't think it was imagination, that he just muttered Mum.
You thought it had finished your racing career. As time went on after that, I mean, did you feel that maybe you'd made the wrong decision to think that?
I did, because I mean, I went back and tried touring car racing, which I didn't enjoy. The ethics had changed, and the people I knew, and the whole thing had changed. The tyres had changed, but the sport had meant so much to me that leaving that was a terrible drag. Now, when I got to the point where I think I could have begun to race, in other words, I got my concentration back, which was the last thing, about 5 years after the accident, the sport had changed so much. I mean, the development of the cars and everything else, it just wasn't feasible for me to rejoin it. So now I just make do with the enjoyable sport of the historic racing.
But that accident could have happened at any time. I mean, were you aware that every time you got into a car that you were staring death in the face?
Yeah, one realised it was a dangerous sport, obviously, because I mean, you know, you have to be pretty thick if it doesn't seem that way. But the point is, you have to have complete confidence in your own ability, and I think I did. There were a couple of times when I forced myself to do things like take a corner faster than I really wanted to, because I knew by my experience that I shouldn't have to back off, and I was backing off. You know, when you're going into a really difficult corner flat out, it's very easy for your leg sort of shortens, you know what I mean, and you do back off a bit, and it's quite difficult to hold your foot down. Well, I could get over that by concentration, but I did realise it was dangerous, yes, because of, you know, what has happened. I mean, I've had in my life, I think, 7 wheels come off, the front wheel come off, which is very serious, and I've had about 8 brake failures. And, you know, these things teach you things. I mean, wishbones are broken and things, because cars in those days were not built the way they are today. They weren't custom made. They were the best you could do, but they weren't specialist bits and pieces like now.
Is there a difference between being a genius behind the wheel and being mad?
I think stupidity and bravery are very closely related. I think that you have to... the thing that, to me, would draw the line would be my own courage. Mm. I mean, I know I go into a corner and I think, this is quicker than I want to be, and I'll back off. I haven't got the courage or the stupidity, hopefully, to go faster than I wanted to go, and I think that probably helps quite a lot. But you are continually fighting this battle of where experience helps you, but then you think, well, if I go too far, I'm going to be into a situation I can't control, and those sort of cars were dangerous.
So what do you drive in your day-to-day, ordinary life when you pop down to the newsagents?
I use a Vespa scooter, yeah, because I live in London, yeah, and I've got a 500 SL from when I go out.
How do you reconcile that with the image that is Stirling Moss?
Very well. I don't. It doesn't worry me,
Yes.
but it worries other people. You know, they laugh like hell sometimes, and some of these motorcycle riders, they're not very nice. You know, some of these delivery blokes carve me up a bit. But no, I feel with the scooter that at least I don't have to go fast. I can get up to the front row starting position when all the traffic stops. You know, and it's very good for parking and that sort of thing.
I mean, you had achieved so much so young, and then the career came to an end. Is it true that when you undertook your motorcycle test, that you failed it?
Yes. I failed it because I didn't give signals, and the reason I didn't give the signals was I looked in the mirror and I realised there was nothing behind, and you know, and the guy said, well, you should give signals. I said, well, you know, there was nobody there, but anyway, I retook it and passed it, so I'm all right now.
What do you think in that career your biggest, your best achievement was, the achievement you're most proud of?
Oh, I did over 500 races. It's very difficult to select which one because, I mean, the Mille Miglia, which is 1,000 miles around Italy, which I won in 1955, is unique in its own way. And yet, I suppose, winning Monaco in '61, when I had a privately owned car owned by Rob Walker, which was about 40 horsepower down on the Ferraris, I think it probably was the most exhilarating thing because it was 100 laps. And for 90 of them, I'd been in the lead and the Ferrari's right behind. And I think I just couldn't believe that they weren't sitting there waiting to pass me. And the relief and the exhilaration as I crossed the line and realized that it was my race was enormous.
He streaks over the line, the first ever British winner, with Fangio second and Jean Bérard third.
Is there anybody you look at today with if not envy, a little bit of jealousy or want, and wish you could be them?
Not them, but I would like to be that age to do it. Yes, that I would. That I really regret that I'm not young still, young enough to do what they're doing, because I do love motor racing the way I remember it. Whether I would enjoy it as much today as when I did, I think is unlikely, in truth, because I think that it was the life, not just the event. And I'm a racer. I really enjoy racing and having a go, and I don't think that today they get the same pleasure that we did. I think I was very lucky.
What age do you feel?
I feel about 40, I guess.
You look about 40.
It depends what I'm doing, actually, but there's sometimes when I realise I'm older than that.
Mm. When we look back at this career, I mean, it is just so fantastic when you look at what you achieved, and as I say, what you achieved at such a young age. Were you as good as we think you were?
It depends on what the beholder thinks. It depends what you compare me with. I'm happy with what I did in most cases. Yes, I feel that I did do quite a lot of things which were, because I was very adaptable. I mean, whether it was a sports car, a touring car, a Grand Prix car, or 500, I did all types of racing, and I think that was probably my forte, is that one car to me, although it was quite different to another, was the same thing. We're talking, and if one can get into a car and become part of it, so that it'll do what you ask it to do, and you understand how far you can go, and it's rather like flirting with a girl. I mean, you go too far, she slaps your face. Well, with a car, you know it's likely to slap you, and you just don't want to go that far because it hurts, I can tell you that. So perhaps more than having your face slapped. But I'm happy with the life that I led. I really am, I must admit. It's something I look back on with great warmth, and I miss it terribly, terribly.
Well, if you're or were as good at flirting as you were at driving, you must have been some all-round guy. Stirling Moss, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Swimmer Duncan Goodhue gets talking tomorrow in Sporting Greats at 2:10. And after the news here on BBC Two, Bobby Robson's the one chatting in a new series of Match of Their Day.